Welcome back to Extra Holiday Games. I'm Extra Holiday, and I'm still having issues with my phone protector. Anyway, point is, we're playing Companion Spring Forever, which, you know, judging by the name, I would guess is the last Companion Spring level. I don't think I've heard all of his thoughts that he's put out on this, but I think Ross is, like, pretty much done making Mario Maker levels. Like, maybe he'll come back to it and if they make another Mario Maker. But, like, he sounded like he was, after this, he's like, yeah, I've done what I want. So I do have to take it with me. Like, why does it just sink sometimes? I don't get that. The little platform with the springs on it. I don't get why that would just sink sometimes. Maybe if I just grab it as soon as the thing bounces off of it? Maybe that will work? I don't know. What? Okay, why did I come down here? Nope. Okay. Alright. So yeah, back on the subject of 3D platformers. There are some that I have not actually gotten around to playing that I might be interested in. Namely, what was the one recently that I did play that I really liked? Well, I mean, other than Mario Odyssey. Mario Odyssey was a big deal for me because I quite enjoyed that. And I had the thought, Mario Odyssey exists, right? And it came out after another game that had kind of a similar theme. It was a much smaller game in that it was made by a much smaller team, a much smaller company. It was an indie game. And that game is one that I'd be interested in playing. It's called A Hat in Time. Because that just seems like... Honestly, it almost feels like Nintendo might have taken some inspiration from A Hat in Time. I don't know if that's actually the case, but... Because there are certain things in that game that I've seen. I haven't actually played it yet. There are certain things that seem to be a bit more like... Well, first of all, the hat theme. Right? Because the name of the game is A Hat in Time. The main character is Hat Kid. Okay. So that's kind of a weird thing that exists. There's also just like, I don't remember. No, Mario did have a dive before that, so I guess the inspiration goes the other way there. But like, for some reason, the way the dive works in Mario Odyssey feels to me, or at least looks to me, a lot more like the similar move that Hat Kid has in A Hat in Time, and less like, say, the dive that Mario has in Mario 64. Okay. Why does it just die? Why does it just die? Why does that platform just die? I don't get it. It's like when I took it over, it didn't die for quite as long. So do I have to take it over and then take it back to keep it alive? I don't know. But yeah, Hat in Time, that's one I want to play. I actually haven't ever played, as much as I've seen Mr. Jules Conroy speedrun it. I haven't actually played Banjo-Kazooie. Although I hear Banjo-Tooie isn't nearly as good, so I'm probably not going to try that one. But, you know, there's Hat in Time, Banjo-Kazooie, what other 3D platformers? I might go back and try some of the original, like, Ratchet and Clank games, or I think they remade the first one, right? So, maybe try that. Because again, it didn't really interest me at the time, but Yeah, I think part of the reason Ratchet and Clank didn't really sink in with me, it was kind of the opposite problem of like Jak 2 and 3, where it felt like it was kind of leading too far into the like zany, wacky, you know, oh, we're a crazy, silly platformer kind of thing. But I don't know, maybe it would be a better than I anticipated, you know. Maybe it is. I don't know. I think also part of the reason I remember Ratchet and Clank kind of having a bit more in the way of cutscenes. And I don't know that I'm really a huge fan of cutscenes in 3D platformers, because let's face it, not a whole lot to the story in those games, right? So, and like, could you make a compelling story for a 3D platformer? Probably. But I don't think it's necessary at all. I think most of the time your effort is better spent elsewhere. But, although I'm curious. I guess there are some examples of platformers that do have good stories. I mean, I recently on stream, I think I've mentioned this, I beat Metroid Dread, and I would consider that to be a good story, even though it's kind of minimalist. There's like a huge lore dump at the start, and then a lore dump in the middle, and then a lore dump at the end. Like, aside from that, it's really just about the atmosphere, you know, and environmental storytelling, which is great. I love environmental storytelling. Why did it work the one time and not this time? I don't get it. But yeah, so yeah, there is room for stories in platformers. It's just, I don't think cutscenes honestly, I don't think cutscenes are the best way to do story in any game, really. I'm much more a fan of, like I said, environmental storytelling, or like, even if you have to resort to dialogue, I feel like even just like dialogue during gameplay instead of, and I mean actual gameplay, not riding your horse from point A to point B, like, you know, certain Red Dead. I actually haven't played that game, but I just know that it's kind of infamous for that. Like, oh, you rode your horse all the way across the map to do this story mission? Well, I guess we're just gonna ride our horse all the way back across the map while we're talking. It's like, great. Actually just watched a video recently by Yucko Cinnamon on Breath of the Wild. And yes, it's been 4 years since that came out. And yes, he pointed out in the video that it had been 4 years since it came out. But I think he had kind of an interesting perspective, because initially he wasn't too fond of Breath of the Wild. And I think that's I feel like most of the people I've heard talk about Breath of the Wild were just like, yes, I instantly fell in love with it. And I forgot where I was going with this point. Woo! Okay. Yeah, I watched his video, and he had, I mean, that's where I got the Red Dead example. It's because it's ultimately it is about Breath of the Wild, but it's also basically how Breath of the Wild is a open world game that's different than most modern open world games. And I agree. You know, I think the philosophy going into it was very different. And honestly, I'm not terribly surprised that, you know, if Zelda went back to a more open world, like exploratory type of format like it originally started with, because if you didn't know, the inspiration for the first Legend of Zelda was Miyamoto, when he was a kid, exploring around the Japanese countryside and discovering stuff, and basically going on an adventure where you're exploring and finding things and having fun that way. Whereas Mario was more meant to be like the more linear idea of like, oh, here's a game where you save a princess from a monster. It's like, okay, that's pretty simple, It's essentially he essentially went with like, okay, this game is going to be the linear one and this one's going to be the one about exploration. But over time, the Zelda games became more and more linear, culminating in Skyward Sword, which is it's pretty linear. Like, it's not the most linear game ever. There are games that are more linear. I keep saying the word, so it's running out of meaning. But there are games that railroad you more than, say, Skyward Sword. Honestly, I would probably argue something like, I would maybe, again, potential hot take. I think potentially I would argue that Metroid Dread is more linear than Skyward Sword, even if it doesn't feel like it. Because hey, that's another thing I've watched videos on. I think it was a GMTK video about why Metroid Dread doesn't feel linear but is linear. Right? It doesn't feel like you're being guided on a specific path or even told that you have to go a specific way. But in reality, you actually are. Because I pointed that out when I was playing it, and I don't think that's something that everyone noticed, is there were several points in the game where they made you go through basically what equated to a one-way door that you can't go back through until you have a later upgrade. And it's actually kind of a really interesting idea when it comes to Metroidvania style games, because kind of the whole crux of those games is up until that point, at least, was you can't move forward until you get a specific power or upgrade or whatever. But something that Metroid Dread does is it says, hey, you can't go back until you get a specific power or upgrade or whatever. And that has its benefits, but if you're like me and you spot what they're doing, then it can feel a little meh. Like, that was probably my least favorite part of that game, was just the fact that it felt, at points, it felt like, man, I really want to go back and get some stuff that I know I can get, or that I know I could get right now, but I actually just can't get there because some debris fell and is blocking my way now, and that kind of sucks. I want to be able to get things as soon as I have the tool to get them, but then essentially what happens is they're like, oh no, now you need another tool to get back there and get it. And it's like, But I still love that game. I still love Dread. Why does it die? Why does it die? Why does it die? I think what I have to do is I have to delay its spawn. I think it feels kind of cheesy, but I think that's what I have to do, because otherwise I don't know what to do. I guess maybe I could throw the spring in the lava and bounce off it before it sinks, but then I won't have the spring. And I'm supposed to have the spring, I'm pretty sure, because I need to bounce the Koopa shell up again. Nope. Okay, maybe this will work. Actually, you know what? I think the idea is probably that I need to throw it in front of me to bounce the Koopa shell. and not just go over there and set it down. I would argue that that's not a super obvious thing, but maybe I'm just stupid. Like, I feel like it's not, I feel like it's something that isn't signposted well enough, if that is the case. But I don't know. Again, maybe I'm just stupid. Maybe other people would figure it out quicker. Oh, it didn't even hit the P-switch. Well, then allow me. And maybe I'll hit the P-switch again next time. But as for this episode, that's a wrap. Hey, we're back to 69 lives.